So welcome again, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the 14th part of the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 webinar series, third Thursdays at 3. My name is Brooke Shipwright, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer at NLIHC. With just 19 days until Election Day, we're going to be focusing today's webinar on getting out the vote. Let's see. But before we dive in, there are just a few logistics to go over. There will be time for questions at the end of today's webinar. If you have a question, you can either use the questions and answer Q&A box or the chat box on your screen. We'll email everyone after today's webinar with a link to both a recording of today's webinar and the PowerPoint slides. If you have any technical difficulties, as we all know, we run into those from time to time, please feel free to email them. Email my colleague Joey at jlindstrom@nlihc.org, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. And then we will also have, I see we do need to promote our closed caption interpreter to get some closed captions. One moment. Okay, so it looks like we should be set with that. And I'll just drop the link in for closed captions. You can follow the link that Bobby shared in the chat. We also have ASL interpreters, as you can see on your screen, available today. If you need anything tech-wise, let us know, but we'll go ahead and get started. So today, I'll be starting us off with an introduction of our speakers. I'll do a quick review of the Our Homes, Our Votes project for anyone who is new to this series, and a few quick updates from Capitol Hill. Then I'll turn it over to our guest speakers to talk about the Get Out the Vote efforts they're working on in their states. We'll talk about some election protections and how to ensure every vote is counted. Like I said, we'll then leave time at the end to answer your questions. So today's speakers include myself, Brooke Shipwright, Housing Advocacy Organizer at NLIHC, Bambie Hayes-Brown, President and CEO of Georgia ACT and a member of the NLIHC Board of Directors, Kennedy Tate, Community Organizer at Homes RI in Rhode Island, Cristin Langworthy, Community Organizer at Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, and Aquene Freechild, Co-Director of Public Citizen. So thank you all for joining us today. I'll just begin today's webinar, as we always do, with a general overview of Our Homes, Our Votes 2020. We work through the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 campaign. We work to increase voter registration and turnout among low-income renters and advocates, whether that's getting to the polls or casting their absentee or mail-in ballots. There are, of course, three parts to this work: registering, educating, and mobilizing voters. Previous webinars we focused on have looked at the registering and education elements and done some deep dives into the various pieces of those. And today we'll be really honing in on the mobilization piece. We do this work for a couple of reasons. As you can see on the chart in front of you, there's always a disparity in voter turnout between renters and homeowners, about a 20-point difference. In this next graph, you'll see that this disparity is even greater when you look at voter turnout by income. Households earning less than $20,000 a year vote at much lower rates than households earning more than $100,000 a year. And we know that our efforts to elevating housing in elections is gaining traction. A poll we did last year shows that 83% of the public agrees that elected officials are not paying enough attention to the cost of housing and the need for more affordable homes, and 76% say they're more likely to vote for a candidate with a detailed plan for making homes more affordable. So just a quick note about our work at NLIHC on a federal COVID-19 response. We continue to call for emergency rental assistance, a uniform national eviction moratorium, $11.5 billion in emergency solutions grant funding for people experiencing homelessness, and additional funds to support federal housing programs. We've now seen the negotiations start and stall a few times, each time with traction on these specific asks. So I know we sound like a broken record at this point, but please do keep calling your members of Congress, urging them to weigh in with their leadership about the importance of these resources. Keep talking about the need in your communities. We can't predict the politics of how this is all going to play out, but we can keep putting this issue at the forefront. So one other thing I wanted to briefly highlight, which we talked about last time, is an important piece of legislation that won't take effect before this year's election, but will likely be taken up again in the next Congress and would be important for future elections. Senate Bill 3529, the Natural Disaster and Emergency Ballot Act, would ensure that all voters across the country have the option to request absentee balloting and would require at least 20 days of early voting in every state. And it would provide $3 million to begin implementing these requirements. And then a quick reminder that with so many new voting options and rules in place this year because of coronavirus, we're providing state-specific voting info on the Our Homes, Our Votes website at ourhomes-ourvotes.org. And then our last call for swag. So as you've heard in previous webinars, we asked people to sign up as Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates. We got a lot of great interest in that. And a lot of people doing great work out there. We do have some leftover swag. And so if you sign up today, we will send you t-shirts, buttons, stickers, posters, what we have left. If you can put it to use in your voter registration or get out the vote efforts yet this election cycle, please sign up as an Our Homes, Our Votes affiliate today. So enough of me talking. That's an overview of Our Homes, Our Votes and some important updates. I'd like to start our Get Out the Vote discussion by turning it over to our first speaker, Bambie Hayes-Brown, President and CEO of Georgia ACT. Bambie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. And I will be brief because I'm looking forward to answering any questions that may be available. Again, I'm Bambie Hayes-Brown, President and CEO of Georgia, Advancing Communities Together. And when we undertook this initiative, I wanted to make sure that we included both rural and smaller urban communities, as well as urban communities. Georgia ACT is based in Atlanta, but as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of voter engagement going on in the city of Atlanta. So we wanted to make sure those smaller communities who are often disenfranchised have some voter engagement. So the first slide you see is from our rural voter engagement with Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, New Rho Omega chapter in Hinesville. They did a Get Out to Vote and voter registration event for 150 people that they registered to vote on that day. And they're also going to put together a billboard that will have Georgia ACT's logo and the Our Homes, Our Votes logo. And that billboard will run in Hinesville, Georgia. That is near military base in Southeast Georgia from the 19th, October 19th through November the 3rd. And they will also be giving out bottled water and snacks to volunteers at all the polling locations. You'll also see the city of Rochelle, Georgia, another very small community of about 1,300 people. They had their census and voter registration day, where approximately 100 people signed up for the census and registered to vote. So they use part of their funds to purchase Chromebooks, to put in some of the stores in the community. And then one of the city council members also took one of the Chromebooks around to the community and around to people's homes. So, and some in the rural areas, you have to be creative and actually get out there, and of course, socially distancing and sanitizing and all of that. So next slide. And then we also have some rural engagement from another fraternal organization, Mesa Port number 174. They did some social media engagement around Middle Georgia. So that includes Bibb County, Baldwin County, Peach County, and Houston counties in Middle Georgia. And so they were very instrumental in getting a lot of social media traction, as well as they thought about the people who are working during the polls. They're working a lot of long hours and often don't have a chance to take a break or eat lunch. So they're actually going to purchase some refreshments and snacks to feed the poll workers in Middle Georgia. Bibb County is a smaller urban community, but Baldwin, Peach, and Houston counties, they have some smaller rural areas also. So we were looking to fill in those gaps that were not served. Next slide. And again, another fraternal sorority, the Warner Robins Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. They had an outstanding social media campaign with over 9,100 Facebook users for their voter education, as well as their virtual Meet the Candidate town hall. So we were very pleased. They had a lot of engagement, and their target was women. So targeting women for voter engagement between the ages of 35 and 44. So they've also did some text banking, a virtual get out the vote game night, targeting high school and college students. So that was something that was very creative in Middle Georgia. So again, serving the smaller urban and the rural communities. Next slide. This is something that I thought was very, very creative and just something that I just did not think about. And so I was glad we partnered with the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. They have their membership is over 10,000 members throughout the state of Georgia. And as you can see, they have put out some social media campaigns about get out and vote. They've also did some in-person voter engagement, as you see on your right, with some of these subordinate chapters and lodges in the communities. But I want to pay attention to the left. That is Mr. Corey D. Shackelford, who is the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge. And what they did was, while during the protests and rallies and uprisings in Atlanta, they actually handed out voter engagement and voter registration and reminders of deadlines to register to vote. And so I thought that was very creative for them to take it, to use that as an opportunity, the uprisings in Atlanta, to get that information out to people. And they also continued that effort as they got out to help clean up the community and to give that information to others who were cleaning up the community due to the Atlanta uprisings. Next slide. And this is some urban and voter engagement. The NID, Housing Counseling Agency, Emerson. So engaging our HUD-approved housing counseling agencies was another thing that we did. They had 500 attendees for their homebuyer education workshops that were done virtually. And myself, I did speak at quite a few of those homebuyer education workshops, engaging people to vote, because if they're buying a house, they're going to move, they need to update their voter registration. So it was a good way to pull in our housing counseling agencies, as well as they registered 600 people to vote on their community food day. So they capitalize on giving out food and food distribution, as well as registering to vote. And then on your right, you see the Atlanta West End Seventh-day Adventist Church. They had a event on September the 22nd where they registered 31 people to vote. Next slide. And another urban partner, this has been really our main partner in this effort, the DeKalb Branch NAACP. They have their Get Vote Ready campaign. And so we partnered with them for 30 thus far, and they're still going, 30 voter engagement activities, as well as 12 candidate forums. So you have the link here where I included a link to the one of the candidate forums for DeKalb County's commissioners, and as well as they also did a Get Vote Ready YouTube video. So if you get a chance, please make note of those, and please, National Income Housing Coalition, feel free to distribute those to the attendees. But they have done a lot of voter engagement, and one of the voter engagements was working with people who were coming into McDonald's, as well as working in McDonald's at various locations in DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, and Clayton County. So that was a great high traffic area, an idea to work together with other NAACP branches in the region, as well as Georgia ACT and Our Homes, Our Votes. Next slide. And I will begin to wrap up with some things to look forward to. Rise to the polls. And so this is one of the things that I was very intentional about, making sure that we not only get people registered to vote, and but to make sure that people actually get out and vote. And in your rural areas, they're much spread out. They usually have one voter precinct in the entire county. And so our rural partners with the Bryan County NAACP, they will actually be taking people to the polls, as well as one of our urban partners, the DeKalb NAACP. They will be taking people to the polls, but people have to call or email, make an appointment, so that they will make sure that people are socially distanced. They will have masks, they will have hand sanitizer. So we want to be safe. And this came out from an idea from my hometown of Cordele, Georgia, where my former city commissioner, Commissioner Royce Reeves, borrowed a limousine from a funeral home back in 2018 to take people to the polls. I just want to make sure this was not their final ride, but it was a way to get people to the polls in the rural areas that don't necessarily have the transportation available. And so you will see this article in the New Yorker, as well as the video. This was really a great video about voter suppression and things that were done. Commissioner Reeves was had state troopers and the sheriff's department or office and police follow him and said that he was parked illegally while he was trying to drop off people to go and vote. So this was a very interesting video. So please make sure to view it when you have a chance. And so next slide. And this includes Georgia ACT. This is my contact information. We are working virtually. So this is my cell number and our social media, as well as our email address. So please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions after this webinar, and I will definitely be on afterwards to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bambie. Really appreciate that. It's so fun to see all the different things you have going on there in Georgia. So we were going to turn to Kennedy in Rhode Island. She's still having some tech issues getting logged on. We're trying to work on that. So I'm going to turn it next to Cristin Langworthy, community organizer of Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. Thank you so much, Cristin.
Thank you for having me, Brooke. Very happy to be here with you all to speak a little bit about our work in Rhode Island at the Coalition for the Homeless on getting out the vote amongst our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. They face even more barriers than typical voters in accessing both registration and actually casting their ballot, getting to the polls. So what we focused on in our work here is trying to make a little bit stretch a long way in terms of developing some resources to distribute to our partners in our providers that are working with folks in the day-to-day, every day on the ground. We worked with our Secretary of State's office to develop a PSA to talk about what it means to be a voter with housing insecurity. Some of the barriers specifically are the questions that we were hearing from folks as we were doing outreach to address those issues. such as how do I register if I don't have a physical address, or if I've moved recently or have lost my home and I'm staying somewhere temporarily, how do I get my mail ballot sent to me where I'm staying now? Things like that were addressed in that PSA that we were able to distribute to folks who are working with those across the spectrum in different areas, not just in the housing advocacy world, but things like food distribution, people working in education and family and housing. We also worked with the Secretary's office to launch for the first time ever a 211 voter information hotline, and to make sure that those who called in with questions related to their housing status and how it impacts their vote or their ability to vote are able to get the answers to those questions, so that trusted information wasn't siloed and inaccessible to voters who maybe do not have online access, for example. Since Rhode Island is a fairly small community, we have some advantages in that it's easier to get around for a lot of folks, as opposed to, you know, an area like Georgia where there's wide rural areas that are very, have a hard time getting to the polls. However, there are still rural areas and people still do face transportation barriers. And the other element of concern this year has been people's trust in the election integrity itself, specifically related to mail ballots. And so we've worked with a coalition of other organizations across our state to push for the installation of drop boxes for the return of mail ballots by hand, as well as, for the first time ever, getting a 20-day period of true in-person early voting at town halls in all 39 cities and towns in the state, and to develop a locator tool that includes visualized photos of the drop boxes and locations where people will go to vote. So we're going across barriers that maybe are language oriented, for example, with a visual component to locate the most convenient way to return a mail ballot or to locate an early voting location. We also developed, in conjunction with the PSA, a physical FAQ printout that we could distribute to folks who are working with clients in the field to know what their voting rights are, what their voter ID requirements are, and how to vote when you're facing questions about your housing status, as well as a standard form called a voter address affirmation guide. These are just tools that we wanted to distribute to empower anyone working in a provider role or in a community organizing role to have at their disposal, so that they can serve clients as they come in contact with people, given the challenges of doing in-person organized events in COVID times. And we could go to the next slide. I will say that voter ID is particularly challenging for people experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity, especially in light of COVID. Things like the DMV have been more difficult to access to get a photo ID that is required in order to vote in person. So we've emphasized mail ballots where we can have someone request and have it sent to an address they can claim their ballot at. But the typical alternative would be to make an appointment at the Secretary of State's office to get a non-driver's license based photo ID if you don't have access to a DMV or can't afford the fees, because the photo ID that the state provides is free and for use for voting. And so those issues have been a little more complicated this year. The emphasis we've pivoted to has been to largely draw attention to the fact that there's been a slight extension on the expiration dates that are allowable on voter IDs, alternatives to photo ID that are permissible under our state laws. And since every state has its own set of criteria for determining, you know, what form of ID, if any, is required to be shown, it's really important that we emphasize to people that you have to consult your own state's election laws and regulations when you're making any kind of information that you're distributing or just talking about what people's rights are, because it is not a one size fits all, and making sure that people have the right information is the most important. Knowing your rights is very difficult when you're facing a question about where you're going to stay at night. And I think that that has been a particular challenge. So we've also worked with our Attorney General's office to ensure that those have been updated to reflect COVID-related concerns and questions, especially around the mail ballot application and return process. We can go to the next slide now. Thanks, Brooke. So election protections are going to be, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Cristin, I only have the one slide for you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, what I would have shared with our other slide is we have also done a little bit of voter registration outreach, as Bambie had described, in conjunction with our census outreach. And we were able to register a good number of voters who were experiencing housing insecurity, but were very passionate about participating. And so I wanted to speak on that for just a moment, because there's often a misconception about apathy, and people's attitudes about voting are complicated. But I think what my work has really revealed in the outreach is that people are very passionate and they are not apathetic, but what they lack is trusted information and resources that directly connect them to their ability to cast a ballot, as well as the obstacles in many states, including my own, of actually getting registered and getting access to a mail ballot or knowing where your polling place is. For example, as of today, Rhode Island has not yet set polling locations for our cities and towns for folks to make a plan to vote. As you can imagine, that makes it more complicated to decide what your plan is going to be. And those who applied for a mail ballot had to, fill out that application, send it in, and are now waiting for their mail ballots to be sent to them. If you're experiencing some insecurity in your housing, that presents its own problems because you may not be in the same place from day to day. And so making sure that if someone has applied for a mail ballot and we facilitated that, following up with them, sending reminders, offering to track for the voter information that will be helpful to them, and connecting them back to confirming that their ballot is going to be cast and then counted as well is very important in giving people the confidence that when they participate, it is meaningful. Overall, the emphasis has been to also encourage folks to become voters for housing. So beyond just the people we are trying to register and empower to participate from our community experiencing housing insecurity, we also wanted to engage and empower advocates and organization members and allies in our community who care about this issue, and to emphasize that when we all vote, we build power together. And that power enables us to advocate for the kinds of policies and investments we know are necessary to end and prevent homelessness, to expand access to affordable housing, and to generally lift people into a place where they're able to live full lives and participate more meaningfully in civic life. So that has been an overall message, that it's not just about getting folks registered or getting them to the polls, but about building an energy of accountability for decision makers, elected officials, to know that I am a housing voter, I am a voter who cares about ending homelessness, and that is why I'm going to not only cast my ballot this year, but why I'm going to be calling and following up and paying attention to the kinds of legislation and budgets issues that we're going to see in the next few months and years to come. So it is about building power. We build more than housing with ballots, we build community. And I think it's really important that we emphasize beyond the practical, the spirit of the Our Homes, Our Votes message as well. So I'll pause there. And I, like Bambie, I am very happy to answer questions if anyone has any.
Thanks so much, Cristin. Sorry about the only one slide thing. And I did mean to note to everyone, Cristin shared a lot of great resources with me to put together this slide. I think it might be easier, instead of taking screenshots and everything of all of the cool tools, I thought I would just attach them in the follow-up email that I send out after today's webinar. So
Brooke, I would follow up just two tools that I found particularly useful in the outreach that I don't know if other states have this option at their disposal, but the locator tool for drop boxes, if you're using drop boxes, is something that's easily shareable digitally and has been very helpful for people to feel confident that they know where they can bring their ballot if they're not returning by mail. But also the voter affirmation, address affirmation guide. And I just wanted to emphasize that, at least for the state of Rhode Island, not having an address doesn't mean that you don't have the right to vote. In fact, you absolutely have the right to vote, no matter what your housing status is. And the affirmation guide is a great template to use to understand where you are supposed to vote. So again, if you've moved recently and didn't update your voter registration information, you may think that you're voting in one location and the state thinks you're supposed to vote in another. When you show up at the polls, you don't want someone to not vote because they did not know they were supposed to be in a different place. So emphasizing things like use of provisional ballots where available, and the affirmation address guide, which you can sign at the polling place here to confirm, basically to swear that you are eligible, that you've either recently moved and haven't changed your address, your registration information, or something to that effect. It's a way to keep people from walking away from polling places on election day or early voting, and not actually casting a ballot. And the last thing I'll emphasize is we are heavily going to be pushing the early in-person voting option. We thought mail ballots were going to be the big thing for November, and I think there are a lot of reasons why that may not be the case for us here in our state. There's increased turnout for mail ballots by a lot, but less than what we projected earlier in the year. But the early in-person voting is hugely popular, is already starting to see a lot of turnout as it started this week. And especially for folks who are living in towns and cities that don't have a permanent place to stay and are unsheltered, when they know they can go and vote right in town and city hall, a place that they may be familiar with already, it is more likely that they will do so. And right now I'm emphasizing with our Secretary of State's office, trying to get funding assigned to pay for bus passes and for coupon code for Uber or Lyft or other rideshare programs that might be operating that aren't already free on election day, because we cannot provide actual vehicles and rides to the polls, unfortunately. But we do want to try and take what money is available and put it towards making transportation less of a barrier. So I had forgotten about that as an update from today, actually. So the world keeps moving as we speak.
Yes, it really does. Thank you so much, Cristin. That's really great. Sticking with the theme of Rhode Island, I'm going to go back a couple and introduce Kennedy. Kennedy Tate is also in Rhode Island and is a community organizer at Homes RI. Thank you so much for joining us, Kennedy. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Hello, everyone. As Brooke just said, my name is Kennedy Tate. I am the community organizer for the Housing Network of Rhode Island. Just to provide some background information on the Housing Network and what we do, we are the state's membership organization for agencies committed to the development of affordable housing in vital communities. The Housing Network is currently composed of 13 community development corporations and affordable housing developers, and our members have created thousands of affordable housing units and are leading the community revitalization and economic development efforts across the state. The Housing Network also belongs to Homes RI, which is a coalition of housing, health, and education organizations and advocates working together to increase and preserve the supply of safe, healthy, and affordable homes throughout Rhode Island. We believe Rhode Island can and should be a state where all residents are able to live in safe, healthy, and sustainable homes in thriving communities. The Housing Network has pursued voter engagement opportunities and get out the vote efforts through the Homes RI Coalition, as well as working with our membership community development corporations and working closely with the Secretary of State office in order to register, educate, and mobilize renters and affordable housing advocates to be involved in voting. You can go to, okay, never mind. That's like, never mind. So the first activity I wanted to talk about is the, we registered to be a partner in early vote day in anticipation of the election. We were planning to have a socially distanced fall-centric arts and crafts and pumpkin decorating event to say that we are housing voters, along with providing resources and information tables for community members that attended. But unfortunately, due to the recent increase of COVID-19 cases in Rhode Island, we're pivoting away from an in-person event. Instead, we are looking at some remote engagement options. What's gained the most traction so far is distributing a housing and voting centric coloring sheet to children at our member housing developments, receiving pictures of the sheets colored in from the parents, and then posting the colored sheets to our social media with a hashtag. And as incentive, participants would be entered into a raffle for resubmitting the coloring sheets. We were also looking at contacting some school districts with the coloring sheet in order to garner more participation. And this is all recent developments for today. So we're still looking to see what direction we're going to go to, as far as that event. But in September, we collaborated with the Secretary of State's office to hold a virtual voter registration training for resident service coordinators at our development sites. I was actually able to do some tabling at a member site and work with the resident service coordinator there to directly register residents to vote. We were also distributing mail ballot applications, but a lot of the residents were pretty intent on either doing voting early in person, as Cristin said, it's becoming very popular, or going to the polls on election day. I was also able to represent the housing network at a community voter registration drive in Central Falls, and we distributed information about the CDC eviction moratorium to several residents and answered any questions that we could about the eviction moratorium and the rights that tenants had. This was all really part of an effort to get renters at our properties registered to vote ahead of the deadline for new voters, which was October 4th. We also had some of our community development corporations register with the Our Homes, Our Votes Housing Providers Council. I partnered with Cristin Langworthy to do informational sessions about a wide array of election-related topics. As she said, we released a FAQ about voting with housing instability. We are also planning on having candidate engagement sessions with voters, in which candidates would be able to take questions about their stances about housing and what their views on about like affordable housing in Rhode Island ahead of the election. And we are also pursuing flyers. We're also looking to distribute flyers that detail the different ways to vote in this election with a student organization at Brown University.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. A lot of great work going on there in Rhode Island.
Brooke, if you don't mind, I didn't want to one thing that I think both Kennedy and I had talked about at one point over the last month or so, and something I think will start coming up more and more as we're going into these last weeks. There were, in the Know Your Rights section of our resources, in particular, people have questions about their status as maybe formerly incarcerated or people with criminal records. And for the state of Rhode Island, we passed felony rights restoration legislation in 2006. And so anyone who is not currently incarcerated in the state of Rhode Island, including people who are in the, going through a trial phase or any charges or are on probation or parole, if you're not currently incarcerated, you do have the right to vote. And so that has been one of the pieces of information people, I don't think, have enough access to. And I would encourage anyone who's working on outreach in these last few weeks to, make that information something that you highlight. Beyond voter ID, people's intimidation away from voting often is connected to their perception that it's not for them or that there's a law or a rule against them participating. And I think particularly with people facing homelessness or housing insecurity, there's a lot of overlap in those populations. So rights depend on what state you're in and what community you're in. Obviously, check your own state rules. Your Attorney General's office should be able to clarify if you do have a question, if your Secretary of State's office cannot answer it. But at least here in Rhode Island, you know, we have been trying intentionally to raise the profile of that information because it's a hard myth to dismantle when someone believes that having been incarcerated means they can no longer vote. And that has not always been the case in our state as well. So it's not just a myth, it's also history.
Yeah, that's a really important piece. Thank you. So now we are going to turn to our final speaker, Aquene Freechild, who is the co-director of Public Citizen, to provide some information about election protections and ensuring that every vote is counted. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I co-direct our Democracy Field program called Democracy is for People at Public Citizen. The next slide. So I'm going to do a quick review on election protection just because I want everyone on this call to remember 866-OUR-VOTE and tell 2 other folks about that. You can text that number, you can call that number, you can make that number into a hashtag or tweet at that number if you have a problem on election day. You can use that number to make sure that somebody who cares about voting rights sees or hears what your problem is, whether it's getting registered or voting or there's long lines. We want to hear about all of it. So that we can respond and help voters as much as possible. And there's a team of lawyers behind that line that can also sue to keep the polls open if they open late or if there's been other problems. But I'm actually going to speak briefly to the different roles that we're recruiting volunteers for as part of the Election Protection Coalition, which is headed by the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights Under Law and Common Cause. But we are part of that, a relatively recent number. There's a lot of things that folks can do. They do not have to go and be a poll monitor in person, although that is one great way to help and put out signs and let folks know about the number, the hotline. We are looking for roving poll monitors who can be on their car and on their bike or in a car, just monitoring the lines, making sure key things are there for voters. And there's a huge team this year monitoring social media, and I'm going to be talking about disinformation later, but a lot of folks, especially younger folks, aren't as comfortable calling in now with their issues for voting. So we monitor social media to see what problems come up and respond on social media, on Twitter and Facebook and whatever platforms we can. At the same time, we'll be seeing disinformation around voting and flagging it through that crew. And it does vary by state how many of these roles are available. And then there's going to be some volunteers contacting voters who might be low propensity or might have problems. We anticipate they might have problems to help them. And there's some folks who are volunteering, working with election officials directly. So there's a lot to do, and it's not all in person. Certainly we appreciate in-person volunteers. Next slide. But to sign up to do any of the things I just described, go to protectthevote.net. If you are a lawyer and you want to work the hotline, specifically only legal professionals should sign up on the second link, 866ourvote.org/volunteer. But most of you should sign up on protectthevote.net if you're interested. Next slide. So really briefly, some things, just important reminders and easy messages to get out to folks about voting. You've heard a lot of this already on the call, but a couple more things. Folks should check their registration. Even my mom has been in the same place for 20 years and her registration had her at her old address this year in Wisconsin. So it is totally possible for registration to change. And if folks don't check it because they've lived in the same place for a long time, we won't know about the problems until election day when they may be asked to vote provisionally. This really helps us if there is an election security issue to find it early with the voter data. So check your registration, even if you think you're registered. Keep calm, vote early, be an October voter. We heard lots of people are heeding that advice. Using those slogans can help get the word out, especially the October voter piece. And I have sample social media if folks are interested for any of this, including graphics. Request ballots now and get them back in. Make sure that folks sign those ballots at a minimum and seal them. We don't want folks to go to the trouble of voting absentee and then not have that ballot counted. And then tell everyone that we expect the results are going to be delayed in some states because this is more mail-in absentee ballots than many states have seen, and it takes time to count. And in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in particular, they're not allowed to start even opening those envelopes and flattening them and stacking them to go through the machines to count the vote until Election Day or the day before Election Day in Michigan. And so that means that, you know, there's millions of ballots being cast in those states by mail, and they have to be able to process them. So it's going to take some time, and that's good. We want to count every vote. And then if folks have that ballot and they don't cast, then they don't get it in the mail until it's pretty close to Election Day. After October 23rd, we really encourage folks to drop that ballot off if they can with their election official, or in a drop box if that's an option for you. You might, the different options per state, in case it gets delayed in the mail. And that again varies. To pivot, so there's about 100, I think 100, well over 100 groups who are working together to make sure that every vote is counted. We are aware that the current sitting president has said that he does not believe in legitimacy of mail-in ballots, even though he votes by mail himself. And he has been quoted as saying, we just have to get rid of the ballots and then there'll be more of a continuation rather than transition. Well, we are all committed in a nonpartisan way to peaceful transition of power. That's a basic undergirding theme of democracy. And so we are committed as a coalition and invite you to join Protect the Results, protecttheresults.com, to mobilizing peacefully should there be any attempt to stop the counting of ballots before it's done. So count every vote is really the core message after Election Day, or even on election night. And then should there fail to be a peaceful transition of power, to come out again peacefully and make sure that our democracy continues and that there is a peaceful transition of power, if that's even a question. Next slide. So this is a map of actions that are already planned. I think there's 160 actions already planned. You know, they're not a specific day right now. Some of them are on Election Day, some of them are Saturday after. But most of them don't have a specific day because we're going to collectively decide as partners within Protect the Results if there's a moment of concern, right, where it seems that there is a serious effort to block the counting of ballots, or that it appears that there might be a chance that there will not be a peaceful transition of power as the voters have decided in whatever direction that is. And there is a C3 version if you're an organization that'd be interested in joining. Any individual can join Protect the Results and sign up to attend a protest or a vigil or an online event. You can see some of these are not in person. But if you're an organization that wants to be part of this, there's a counteveryvote.org is a fully C3 effort to make sure that every vote is counted, shockingly. And I'm going to put that in the chat for folks to see. And there's trainings going on through that coalition that helps people plan for de-escalation. So it may be helpful for your voting related activities. It helps with messaging, and there are daily press clips and other updates. But I think for this group in particular, they're planning on making sure their basic needs met, like water, sanitation, other things that might be needed by voters on Election Day and after at counting locations, providing accurate voting information, some of the same things that election protection provides. The Count Every Vote Coalition will also be looking to provide. So they'll be supporting voters from Election Day onward. And happy to answer more questions. But if you have specific questions about Count Every Vote, I'll put the email of the person who coordinates that coalition in the chat. Okay, disinformation. Everybody has an opportunity to help counter disinformation. I think already a bunch of you are doing that by putting out pro-voter content. Here's how to vote, you know, get excited, be a voter, I'm a voter, already voted, you know, showing yourself, casting your ballot without showing who you voted for. All those things are fantastic and I strongly encourage them, but I know some of these, some of the trolls and bots online that are spreading disinformation or misinformation prey on sort of our weaknesses. And so I think it's worth just flagging a couple things. The trolls are there to sow division and make members of the opposing party, whoever that may be, appear different and threatening, and they're trying to break our democracy by breaking our ability to come to consensus and compromise. But they're also trying to push people who are not as politically engaged out of the process entirely by the conflict. They're trying to confuse people, right? And we're seeing some of that actually work in people's decisions not to vote by mail when they originally planned to, for example. But it's particularly in the interest of the Russian meddlers. We've seen this in intelligence reports that they're trying to actually get us to fight each other. So we don't want to encourage them, but there's some ways that we can accidentally encourage them by engaging them. And then briefly, bots are there to amplify trolls and certain messages and move people to be more extreme. Next slide. So you can hit a bunch, these are all fake accounts. You can see some of them are conservative, some of them are progressive. These are all Russian accounts. So, you know, the proud Black American that tends to get political, the feminists, the flag waving Second Amendment supporter, and the guy with the cute little girl, these are all fake. And so just be really careful who you're retweeting and supporting, and know that the person you agree with is probably that might be sprouting disinformation is the troll that you need to watch out for personally. Next. So pro voter messages, again, just I literally have a note for myself every day, like what pro voter message can I post on my personal accounts? Never ever repost, retweet, share photos, or repeat a post you're trying to counter. Do not do the fact versus myth thing. It reinforces the myth in people's heads. So if you don't like something that you're seeing and you want to comment on it, think of a way to say what you want to say without referencing the disinformation, because the algorithms on social media feed when you retweet or repost or even mention the word that is trending that you're trying to counter, you're actually helping fuel that disinformation. So if there's one thing you take away from everything I'm saying, this is do not repeat, retweet, or even re-mention the meme that you're trying to combat. Next slide. Okay, so I think I've covered most of this. If you do find disinformation on the election, like information that's wrong, whether it's intentional or not, you can report it at commoncause.org/disinfo. There's also a site called Junkipedia that they watch. There's some great tools for this. If you're interested, I'll put my email in the chat and I can send them your way. So next slide. That's it. I'm sorry I went over my time, I think, a little bit.
No, you're totally fine. This is great information. Thank you so much. So I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. I do have a couple of things I want to, want to go over a couple more slides of some other updates. So while I'm doing that, that will give you time to put in your questions to our wonderful speakers today. Please put them in the Q&A chat or chat box, and we'll get to them in just a couple of minutes. So just a reminder that I believe one of our other speakers mentioned this, Vote Early Day is Saturday, October 24th. That is to celebrate early voting and to really rally behind, voting early. So just wanted to remind people of that. We also have a couple of new resources available for people to use in their voter engagement work. They're forthcoming. They're being finalized today and should be online sometime tomorrow. But I just wanted to flag them for people that they'll be coming available. So you can find them at the ourhomes-ourvotes.org/additional resources. And so these, I don't know that I mentioned what they are. The two new resources are a voter guide template and a voting pledge card template. So helping people know what they're voting for specific to your state or region with fillable spots so you can insert that info. And then voting pledge card is to make a plan to vote and commit to voting. So let's see if we have any questions. It looks like some people have put some good information in the chat, some nods to our great speakers. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so please do share that or share your questions in the chat box if you have them. I do have a couple of questions while we're waiting for others. I think Cristin mentioned one thing, you know, in these last less than 3 weeks to election day, like what's one thing to highlight or one thing to really focus on. I'm curious if others would like to, you know, recommend or highlight one thing to do, you know, even for people who maybe haven't even started voter mobilization yet and would like to, or maybe who are doing some stuff, what's something that they should really be thinking about doing in these last couple of weeks.
So, I mean, I'm happy to lead off with another concept that I think is really important to emphasize, other than general knowing your rights for things like casting your ballot or having ID and things like that. That's same-day voter registration. And I find particularly with younger people who may not have already made a plan to be voting and maybe aren't registered, for people who have moved recently or haven't updated their registration information, they're wondering, can I vote? I didn't meet the deadline. And at least for the presidential and vice presidential ballot, you can do same day voter registration. And that means going to the polls and you swear your eligibility like you would as if you were registering just generally. And you're able to cast just the presidential, vice presidential ballot. And why I emphasize that is not only does it enable someone to vote for the president and vice presidential candidate of their choice, but it also creates a pattern of behavior of voting. So it may not have the biggest impact in the race itself, but by getting people to not have one last reason not to be a voter, you're putting them on a path to a future where they're more likely to be a regular voter. And so, you know, it's hard not to see just the election ahead of us, right in front of us, I should say. But there are going to be, I believe, elections beyond this election. And I have faith in my fellow Americans to vote and to protect our democracy, and not taking that for granted at all. But I believe that we should be also encouraging people to do whatever they can to start the habits of being regular voters. And so encouraging same day registration would be my other, one of my other ideas for last message of the last few weeks.
Hi, this is Bambie. I know there's been quite a robust discussion in the chat. Unfortunately, same-day registration is not available in Georgia, but you can advocate for that in your state if you don't have that available. So that is definitely a takeaway that you can do, that you can start right now. You know, you have these elected officials, people are running for office, now they're listening. And so, you know, once they get elected, then you hold them accountable. But I would definitely say, make sure that you vote up and down the ballot. I have seen so many people, they say, well, I'm just going to vote for the presidential candidates. Or some say, well, I'm not going to vote for the presidential candidates. I'm going to vote for everything else. But we need you to vote up and down the ballot. You need to vote all the way. So that would be my takeaway, because as one of the things that we say here in Georgia, all politics are local. Your judges, your DAs, your sheriffs, your city council, your county administrators, a lot of things that we talk about with housing is done locally with zoning and ordinances, and passing legislation such as inclusionary zoning. So definitely vote up and down the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Bambie and Cristin. Yeah, that's such an important point. You know, that's why we do voter education, so that people know who they're voting for, what issues they support, and how that relates to affordable housing issues. We have one follow-up question in the chat, Bambie. While I know we're just over time, but if you don't mind answering. Bambie, what do you suggest when charter amendments are hard for laymen to understand?
Yes, I totally get it. No shade on the attorneys and all the legal people who craft those amendments. But, you know, I think it's important for different agencies such as Georgia Act. I have received several calls just to say, you know, hey, Bambie, what does this mean? You know, what does this amendment do? And so we have been answering those questions, but I think that we can do better as your state partners to have a concerted effort to really get the word out there in layman's terms. And I'll give you an example for the City of Atlanta Land Trust legislation. We have our Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has done robocalls saying, you know, support this amendment. She sent they had these text messages. So any of those types of tools that can, I think that will help. But I definitely think we need to work on that better going forward to get the word out.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up by quickly saying we have one more upcoming episode of webinars in this series, and it'll be after the election, and it'll be about holding candidates to their promises. So what do we do after the election? So thank you all so much for joining. Just one quick note, NLIHC is a membership organization, so if you are able to give, please join today at nlihc.org/membership. Your membership helps us do this work, and please reach out. Our housing advocacy organizers are here to help, and please be in touch. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.